20 years ago, they laughed at him for being poor. They laughed at him for being a black man, raising a child alone. They called him names that were designed not just to wound but to define, to draw a circle around everything he would never become, and dare him to try crawling out. They said his name the way people say the names of cautionary tales, with that particular blend of pity and satisfaction that arrives when someone else's difficulty seems to confirm something you'd already decided about the world. And for 20 years, Marcus Johnson had lived with the weight of those words, not because they were true, but because the people who said them had never once stopped to ask what truth actually looked like. They had looked at a young man holding too much and decided, with the efficiency of people who prefer simple stories, that what they saw was the end of his story. Tonight, they would get their answer. Tonight, inside a ballroom, draped in chandeliers and filled with the warm amber glow of expensive whiskey and expensive nostalgia, the question of who Marcus Johnson really was would finally be answered, not by him, not in the way they might have expected, not with a speech or a grand gesture or any of the performances that revenge usually requires. It would be answered by a woman who stepped out of a Rolls-Royce at precisely 9:14 in the evening, walked through a parting crowd like water moving around stone, reached for his arm without hesitation, and said two words that collapsed the ceiling of every assumption in the room. "He's with me." And everything the room thought it knew turned to dust. Marcus had almost not come. He had stood in front of his bathroom mirror that Saturday afternoon, tie hanging loose around his neck, studying the reflection of a man who had learned long ago that other people's opinions were a currency he could no longer afford to spend. He was 42 years old and looked it not in a diminished way, but in the way that certain decades leave their mark on a person as evidence of work done, and weight carried, and mornings survived that were harder than any morning should have been. His face had a quality his son had once described, with the blunt affection of youth, as looking like it had already seen the movie. He had laughed at that. It was accurate. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier. Thick cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, the kind of thing designed to signal arrival. Eastbrook High School 20-year reunion. He had set it on his kitchen counter and ignored it for 5 weeks and 6 days, walking past it every morning on his way to the coffee machine, with the practiced indifference of a man who has spent years deciding what to let in and what to leave at the door. Then, on the last morning before the RSVP deadline, he had picked up a pen and written yes. Not because he felt the need to prove anything. Not because he had spent 20 years crafting a moment of triumph to deliver in a room full of people who had once written him off. He had said yes for reasons far simpler and far more human than revenge. He wanted to see Mr. Patterson, his old history teacher, the only adult in that building who had ever pulled him aside and said quietly, without pity, without performance, that Marcus had a mind worth protecting. He wanted to look the old man in the eye and say, "Thank you," for the thing that had been planted in that brief conversation and had continued growing through everything that came after. He wanted to give the man that. That was all. After that, he would leave. He had no interest in the rest of it. He drove himself. Not the car he could have driven, not the one sitting in his garage that would have announced his arrival before he ever walked through the door. He drove the old dark blue sedan he kept for days when he just wanted to move through the world without commentary. He parked 2 blocks away, not because he couldn't find closer, but because the walk gave him time. Time to settle whatever was stirring quietly beneath the surface of his composure. Time to remember what he had come for and what he had not. He adjusted his collar in the rearview mirror, looked at his own eyes for a moment, quiet, steady, carrying 42 years of experience behind them, and then he got out and walked. The evening air had that autumn edge to it, cold without being hostile, carrying the smell of the city in the way October always did, concrete and dried leaves, and somewhere, faintly, someone's fireplace. He walked 2 blocks with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders loose, and his breathing even. He was wearing charcoal slacks, a simple black dress shirt, no tie, no watch worth mentioning. He had dressed the way he always dressed when he had nothing to perform. Comfortable, understated, himself. The hotel was the kind of place that existed to make people feel important just by entering it marble floors, a doorman who nodded at everyone with equal enthusiasm, a ballroom that smelled like fresh flowers and old money. Marcus took it all in without expression. He had been in rooms like this one many times. He simply never felt the need to announce it. Inside, the reunion was already in full swing. Name tags, open bar, a slideshow, cycling through yearbook photos on a screen near the back wall, the particular cruelty of old photographs, which freeze a person at the age they were least equipped to be seen. He spotted a few faces he recognized, exchanged quiet nods with a woman named Dana, who had sat behind him in AP Chemistry, and was now apparently a pediatric surgeon, her confidence worn as lightly as a second skin. He got a glass of water from the bar. He declined wine twice from passing servers, with the practiced ease of a man who makes deliberate choices about what he allows at other people's events. He was scanning the room for Mr. Patterson when he heard the voice. It hadn't changed. That was the first thing he noticed. 20 years later, Ryan Carter's voice still carried that particular pitch of someone who had never once in his life been told to lower it. "Well, I'll be damned. Marcus Johnson." The voice was followed by the man, and the man was followed by his audience, a loose cluster of former classmates who had drifted together the way people do when they sense entertainment incoming. Ryan was still broad-shouldered, still wore his confidence like a varsity letter he'd never taken off. His suit was expensive. His smile was the smile of someone who had spent 20 years being told he was remarkable by people who needed something from him. He extended a hand. Marcus shook it. "Ryan?" Marcus said, simply. "Good to see you made it," Ryan said, with the emphasis landing precisely where he intended it. "We were just talking about how long it's been. So what are you up to these days, man?" "Still doing the, He paused, and the pause was deliberate, the kind constructed to leave a person hanging in midair. "The driving thing?" Marcus smiled. It was a real smile, not a performance the kind that lives at the corners of the eyes rather than the edges of the mouth. "I left that behind a while ago," he said. Ryan nodded with exaggerated understanding. Right. So what are you doing now?" And Marcus, without changing his expression, without shifting his weight, without giving a single inch of visible ground, said, "This and that." Ryan's smile sharpened. He turned slightly toward the group behind him, not enough to be obvious, just enough to make sure they were watching. "This and that," he repeated, as though tasting something disappointing. "Man, come on. We're all old friends here. You can be straight with us." The group chuckled softly, warm enough to be polite, sharp enough to be cruel. Marcus looked at Ryan for a moment. He recognized the game. He had seen it played before, this particular ritual, where a certain kind of man who piqued early needs periodically to find someone beneath him to stand on. It wasn't personal. It never had been. It was structural. Ryan needed a floor, and Marcus had always been his preferred option. "I'm doing well," Marcus said. "That's the honest answer." The group laughed again, louder this time, and a few people nearby turned to look. Somewhere in that glance exchange between strangers, Marcus became a punchline he wasn't there to deliver. He finished his water. He set the glass down on a passing tray with the quiet efficiency of a man who does not waste motion. He began to look for an exit, or at minimum, for Mr. Patterson. He found neither before Ryan spoke again. "To understand what happened next, you have to go back further. You have to go back to the beginning of the story that Ryan Carter had never once paused to learn." Marcus Johnson had been 17 years old when his father died a heart attack, fast and without ceremony, on a Tuesday morning in February when the ground was still frozen and the sky was the color of old pewter. His father had been a large, careful man, the kind who fixed things around the house on weekends and kept every receipt and never raised his voice unless something had gone genuinely wrong. The absence of him was physical, a space at the kitchen table that nobody filled, a silence on Sunday mornings where the newspaper had once rustled. His mother had taken the loss in a way that was less like grief and more like damage. Something structural gave way inside her, and she never quite rebuilt it. She managed. She went to work. She kept the lights on. But the woman Marcus had grown up watching move through the world with quiet certainty was replaced by someone smaller, someone who flinched at loud sounds and stayed indoors on days she might once have taken Marcus to the park. He held the household together in the ways he could. He took on a part-time job at a shipping warehouse on weeknights. He cooked dinner. He made sure the bills were sorted in the order they needed to be paid. He did not tell anyone at school. He did not want the particular quality of attention that confession would have invited: the pity, the lowered expectations, the way people look at you when they've decided your circumstances are your destination. And still, through all of it, he maintained the grades that had earned him a scholarship to state, a full academic scholarship, mathematics, the kind of opportunity that was supposed to be the doorway out of everything difficult and into everything possible. He was 3 weeks from graduation when his girlfriend Tanya told him she was pregnant. He sat with that information for a long time. He didn't run. He didn't disappear. He made a decision that he knew would cost him everything. The scholarship represented and accepted it with the same steadiness he had been practicing since the February his father died. He enrolled for a single semester, then quietly withdrew. He told the financial aid office. He told his advisor. He did not make it a tragedy, at least not outwardly, because he had no time for tragedy. He had a child coming. He had a mother who needed him. He had a life to fund. He worked the warehouse through Tanya's pregnancy and into the first years of his son's life. He worked nights so he could be home during the days. He learned to sleep in intervals. He learned to make a week of groceries stretch to 10 days. He learned that love, in its most practical form, is not a feeling, but a schedule. A series of choices made at hours, when most people are asleep, for the benefit of someone who will not remember and does not need to. When Tanya left, not dramatically, not with malice, but simply because she was young and frightened, and the life they'd imagined together had never quite materialized, Marcus became a single father in the most complete sense of the word. He rearranged everything around his son. Night shifts at the warehouse, days at home. On weekends, when a neighbor watched the baby, he took an online course: logistics management, then supply chain operations, then a certification in enterprise systems that took him 18 months to complete, while simultaneously managing a toddler and a mother in declining health, and a job that punished absence. Nobody at Eastbrook High knew any of this. What they knew, what Ryan Carter and his particular circle had circulated through the school's social ecosystem, like a current, was that Marcus Johnson had dropped out, knocked a girl up, and disappeared into exactly the future everyone had predicted for him. It was a story with the satisfying shape of a lesson. It was also almost entirely wrong. Back inside the ballroom, Marcus was still standing near the edge of the group when Ryan leaned in with the particular confidence of a man who believes the room is always on his side. "You know, man, I'm not trying to be harsh," he said, loud enough that the nearest cluster of people could hear every word without appearing to listen. "But I always said some people are built for the long game, and some people just aren't. No shame in it." He delivered it with a kind of generous regret, as though he were doing Marcus a favor by naming something they both already knew. A few people laughed. One woman looked away with the practiced expression of someone who has decided, tonight, not to get involved. A man named Dennis, who had been standing at the edge of the group since the conversation began, took a long sip of his drink and studied the carpet with sudden, focused interest. Marcus looked at Ryan for a moment, not with anger, not with hurt, but with something more like recognition. He had seen this particular performance many times, in many rooms, from many people who needed someone beneath them to establish the height of where they stood. Ryan Carter had simply never updated the material. He opened his mouth to say something quiet, something final, something that would allow him to exit the conversation with his dignity intact and Ryan's preserved in the comfortable fiction he'd built around himself. He was ready to end it. He was ready to find Mr. Patterson and say what he'd come to say and get back to the life waiting for him outside these walls. He never got the chance. Because at that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. The sound was not dramatic. It was simply the clean click of hotel doors swinging wide, followed by the specific change in atmospheric pressure that a room experiences when someone genuinely remarkable enters it. Sophia Bennett did not rush. She never rushed. She moved through the entrance of the ballroom with the measured certainty of someone who understands that the pace at which you arrive communicates everything about how much you need the room's approval. She was 38 years old, and she wore it like a quiet achievement dark dress, no excess jewelry, posture that had been earned rather than performed. Her heels made the kind of sound on the marble floor that registers in the body before the ears have fully processed it. The people near the door shifted instinctively, not because anyone had announced her, but because the body registers certain kinds of presence before the mind has time to process what it's seeing. Someone whispered her name, a low exhale of recognition, almost involuntary, the way people say the names of weather events. Then, someone else did. Sophia Bennett. The CEO. That's Sophia Bennett? Within 30 seconds, a ripple of recognition had moved through the room like a stone dropped in still water, and people were turning toward the door the way people turn toward windows during lightning. She had grown up in Eastbrook quietly, without much social prominence, a girl who sat in the middle rows and did her work, and was neither bullied nor celebrated, simply present. She had left for college and never looked back. And in the years since, her name had become attached to a company that was redefining the way logistics technology operated across 3 continents. She had been on the cover of 2 magazines in the past 18 months. She had been listed among the most influential executives under 40 in the country. She was, in every measurable sense, the most successful person in the room. And she was not looking at Ryan Carter. She was not looking at the bar or the slideshow or any of the familiar faces arranged around the ballroom floor. She was looking, with quiet and absolute certainty, at Marcus Johnson. She moved across the room without hesitation. The crowd parted not dramatically, but in the organic way that happens when someone moves with enough purpose that stepping aside simply feels like the correct response. She passed Ryan without acknowledgement. She passed the cluster of people who had been watching Marcus with amusement 30 seconds ago. She stopped directly in front of him, and for a moment, the two of them simply looked at each other, the look of people who share a history that no one else in the room has access to. Then she reached out and took his arm, easy and natural as breathing, and turned to face the room with a composure that made the room's confusion feel like a private failure. "Sorry I'm late," she said to Marcus, warm and direct, and then, to the cluster of people who were staring with undisguised bewilderment, Ryan Carter foremost among them, she added simply, clearly, without a single inflection of performance, "He's with me." The ballroom went quiet, not the polite quiet of a speech beginning, but the sudden, involuntary quiet of a room that has just discovered it does not understand the situation it is in. Ryan recovered first, because men like Ryan always recover first. That particular variety of confidence is its own immune system. He smiled, and the smile had a new quality in it now, something slightly forced at the edges. "Sophia Bennett," he said, spreading his arms in the gesture of a man welcoming someone to his party. "I didn't know you and Marcus were old friends," she said, before he could finish the sentence. Her voice was pleasant. It was also final. Ryan nodded slowly. "Right. Well, it's great that you came. I didn't see you on the list." "I wasn't on the list," she said simply. "Marcus told me about tonight. I thought I'd come by." She said it without elaboration, which was worse than any elaboration she could have offered, because it left no room for Ryan to locate himself in the story. He laughed, slightly too late. "Well, sure. Of course. I was just giving Marcus a hard time. You know how it is. Old school friends. I do know how it is," Sophia said, and something in her voice shifted not to coldness exactly, but to clarity, the kind that a professional carries when they have decided to end the small talk. "I know exactly how it was." The silence that followed was significant. Ryan looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Sophia. And Sophia looked at Ryan with the particular patience of someone who has spent 15 years making decisions that lesser people second-guessed and has learned that the most powerful response to doubt is simply to wait. She began to speak then, not loudly, not with the theatrical urgency of someone delivering a revelation, but with the calm authority of someone reporting facts. The room, which had been preparing to reassemble itself around the comfortable fiction of Ryan Carter's social dominance, went still in a different way. This was not the quiet of a room waiting to laugh. This was the quiet of a room that has just realized it may have been wrong about something. 15 years ago, she said. She had been 23 years old and working her first real job, an internship, at a mid-sized logistics firm on the north side of the city. She had arrived full of ambition and short on practical knowledge, the way most people arrive at their first real job, and she had spent her first 3 months discovering all the things her education had cheerfully omitted. She had been assigned to prepare a presentation for a quarterly review, and she had gotten it badly wrong. Not wrong in a fixable way, wrong in the way that a person who does not yet know what they do not know gets things wrong. It was 9 o'clock at night. The presentation was due the following morning. She was sitting in the break room on the third floor, surrounded by pages of data she could not organize into an argument, and she was trying very hard not to cry, because crying in a break room on the third floor of your first real job was not, she had decided, the story she wanted to be telling about herself at 23. A man came in to refill his coffee. He was working the night shift building management, maintenance oversight, the kind of job that puts you in the same building as the people climbing the ladder without putting you on the ladder yourself. He saw her papers. He asked if she needed help. She had said yes without thinking about it, because she was desperate and because something in the way he asked suggested that the offer was genuine, not the offer of someone looking for an excuse to sit down, but the offer of someone who had looked at a problem and already begun seeing its solution. He sat down across from her. He spent 2 hours helping her restructure the entire presentation, not doing it for her, helping her understand how the argument should move, how data should support a claim rather than decorate it, how a room full of executives needed to be spoken to differently than a room full of peers, and how the difference was not about vocabulary but about what you assumed people already knew and where you took them from there. He was, she would understand much later, doing for her at 9 o'clock at night in a break room what her MBA program had failed to do in 2 years of coursework. His name, she told the silent ballroom, was Marcus Johnson. The room was very still. Ryan Carter was not smiling. He was watching Sophia with the expression of a man recalculating, running numbers that weren't producing the results he was used to, the particular look of someone who has built a significant amount of his self-concept on a story that is now, in real time, coming apart. The people around him had gone quietly from audience to witness, from spectators at his performance, to something less comfortable than that. Sophia continued. She said that Marcus had not stopped there. He had also, she said quietly, given her the name of a mentor in the industry, a woman named Dr. Elaine Fox, who had taken Sophia on as a mentee and spent 3 years teaching her things about leadership and strategy and the specific art of managing a board that Sophia still drew on every single day. She had drawn on those lessons in her first investor meetings. She had drawn on them in the difficult second year, when the product needed to pivot and the team needed to believe in the new direction before the data existed to support it. She drew on them still, in the way that certain formative instruction becomes so thoroughly integrated that it no longer feels like something learned but simply like a way of seeing. Dr. Fox had been a connection Marcus had made in the course of his own work, a work history that, she said with the faintest shift in her expression, most people in this room had apparently never bothered to learn. She looked at Marcus then. He looked back at her, and there was something between them that was not quite embarrassment and not quite affection, but some compound of both the look of someone who has been recognized in a way they never asked for and isn't entirely comfortable with it. He shook his head slightly, but she held his gaze. She wasn't finished. What Sophia said next rearranged the room, not with drama, with fact. Marcus Johnson, she told them, had never stopped working, not for a single year. Not in any of the years that the people in this room had spent believing his story was already finished. The warehouse jobs, the night shifts, the driving, all of it had been the foundation for something he had been building quietly and without announcement for the better part of 15 years, the way certain structures are built underground before anyone can see what they're becoming. In his late 20s, he had begun formalizing what he knew about supply chain operations and turning it into a company, not a large company, not at first, but a precise one, built around a software system. He had developed in his spare hours with 2 engineers he had met through an industry conference. He had attended on a bus ticket he had budgeted for 3 months. The system had solved a specific and expensive problem in last-mile delivery logistics. The kind of problem that sounds dry until you understand how many billions of dollars move through supply chains every year and how much of it bleeds into inefficiency. It had taken 3 years to prove its value. Then it had taken 1 year to become something that larger companies wanted very badly. He had sold it. He had not sold it cheaply. He had not rushed the decision, had not taken the first offer, had not allowed urgency or need to reduce what he knew the thing was worth. He had used the proceeds to invest quietly, selectively, without noise or public profile in early-stage companies that he believed in, for reasons he could explain in precise technical and financial terms. He was, Sophia said, one of the most rigorous analytical minds she had encountered in 15 years of working in an industry full of people who believed themselves to be rigorous analytical minds. One of those investments had been Sophia's company. In the early days when her board was still deciding whether to trust a young CEO with an ambitious vision and a track record that looked promising on paper but had not yet been tested at scale, Marcus had argued, in the board meeting, that she deserved the runway to prove what she was capable of. He had argued it calmly and specifically, and with the particular authority of someone who had made good calls before and knew why. The board had agreed. Sophia had done the rest. Marcus, Sophia said simply, was currently a member of her board of directors. He had been, quietly, for the past 4 years. And he was, she added, without a flicker of performance, one of the most consequential people she had ever met in her life. Ryan Carter said nothing. He was no longer smiling. His expression had settled into something that was not quite shame and not quite disbelief, but lived in the territory between them, the look of a man who has just discovered that the map he's been using is fundamentally wrong, and that the territory does not resemble what the map described. The cluster of people around him had shifted their posture almost imperceptibly, the way a group of people shifts when the social direction of a conversation reverses, and no one quite wants to be caught in the place they were standing before the reversal. And then, as if the evening had decided that revelation should arrive in waves rather than all at once, as if the universe had a sense of narrative timing that exceeded anyone in the room, 3 men entered the ballroom from the side, entrance near the hotel's conference rooms. They were men in their 50s. Not Eastbrook alumni, not anyone who had been invited to the reunion, but men who wore their professional authority in the particular way of people who spend most of their time in rooms where consequential decisions get made and have stopped needing to perform their importance for anyone. They had the look of people on their way somewhere, who had stopped here briefly because someone they respected was in the building. They scanned the space. One of them located Marcus and moved toward him with the directness of someone navigating by compass. Without the slight social hesitation that most people bring to entering a room they were not expecting to enter. "Mr. Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you're here. We were hoping to catch you before the Westfield meeting on Monday." The second man followed. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for the guidance on the Morrison portfolio. The team wanted me to pass along their appreciation. The analysis was exactly what we needed." The third man simply nodded and said, "Marcus, with the casual ease of people who have spent enough time together, that formality has long since become unnecessary and the title has been retired by mutual agreement." Marcus greeted each of them by name, quietly, without any of the stagecraft the moment might have invited. He made brief introductions, asked 1 or 2 questions about the Monday meeting with the economical fluency of someone who carries many threads simultaneously without dropping any of them. He introduced them to Sophia. He did not look at Ryan. Ryan Carter looked at Marcus Johnson for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not a collapse exactly, but a reorganization. The confidence that had held his features in their comfortable arrangement for the past 20 years seemed, for the first time, to be asking itself whether it had been earned. The men who had greeted Marcus were now standing nearby, in quiet conversation with Sophia, and their presence in the room, the casual authority of it, the ease with which they spoke to Marcus as though he were someone whose time they valued above their own, had altered the ballroom's social geometry in a way that Ryan could not simply ignore. He stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was lower than it had been all evening, stripped of the projection, stripped of the performance, left with something closer to its actual weight. "Marcus," he said, "I owe you an apology." Marcus looked at him, not with anger, not with the cold satisfaction of a man watching a comeuppance arrive on schedule. He looked at him the way a man looks at someone he has long since stopped measuring himself against, with a patience that had nothing to do with forgiveness, and everything to do with the simple fact that he had other things to do with his energy than hold a grudge against Ryan Carter. Ryan continued, "I was an idiot in high school. I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't know anything about you or what you were dealing with, and I was cruel about it, and I'm sorry." The words were genuine. Whatever else Ryan Carter was, whatever deficits of character had produced the last 20 years of his particular social performance, the apology, at this moment, was real. The room could feel it. The performance had left him, and what remained was smaller and more human, and, in its smallness, more honest than anything he had said all evening. Marcus let it sit for a moment. He did not rush to accept it, and he did not manufacture a magnanimous response for the benefit of the audience around them. He simply stood there, in the unhurried way he always stood, and let the silence be what it needed to be. Then he said what he said, and it was enough. Then he said, "Ryan, I didn't come here tonight to collect anything from anyone. I didn't come to prove a point or win a room." He paused, not for effect, but because the next thing he wanted to say deserved the space he was giving it. "I came to say thank you to Mr. Patterson, who is somewhere in this building, and who believed in me at a time when very few people did. That's the whole reason I'm here." He looked around at the faces turned toward him, faces he had known when they were young and unfinished, faces that had laughed at him and dismissed him, and occasionally been kind to him in ways he hadn't always acknowledged. Some of them, he could see, were just now understanding something about themselves that they would carry quietly home tonight and sit with in the dark. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm genuinely not. Some of you had no idea what my life looked like. That's not a crime. But I really do hope that we've all gotten a little better at looking." He wasn't performing the speech. That was what made it land. He wasn't calibrating the words for effect, wasn't building toward a moral, wasn't delivering the lines of a man who had spent 20 years rehearsing this moment. He was simply saying true things in the plainest language available to him, and the room felt the difference between that and a performance the way a body feels, the difference between sunlight and a photograph of sunlight. A woman near the back, Dana, the pediatric surgeon who had said hello to him earlier, pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. Dennis, who had been watching the carpet since Ryan's first jab, let out a slow breath and seemed to straighten slightly, as if something had just been corrected in his posture from the inside. And near the entrance, standing just inside the doorway to the corridor, Mr. Patterson, 71 years old now, smaller than Marcus remembered, wearing a blazer that had seen better decades, but carried itself with dignity. Regardless, was watching with his hands folded in front of him and tears moving quietly down his face. Marcus saw him. He crossed the room without a word to anyone else. He walked directly to the old man and extended his hand, and when Mr. Patterson took it, Marcus felt the grip still strong, still warm, and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized had been held tight. 20 years of it, held without complaint, released in the pressure of one old man's hands. "You came," Mr. Patterson said. His voice was rough at the edges, the way voices get when a person is managing more than they want to show. "I came," Marcus said. The old man shook his head slowly, the way people do when emotion and joy arrive at the same moment, and neither one can fully express itself. He looked at Marcus the way teachers sometimes look at students who went further than even the teacher dared imagine, with a pride that has nothing possessive in it, nothing transactional, just the clean satisfaction of having been part of something that grew. "I always knew," he said. "Not I always knew you'd be successful. Not I always knew you'd prove them wrong. Just, I always knew." Marcus understood what was meant. He nodded. They stood there for a moment, Two men with 20 years between them, and a kindness at the beginning that had seeded everything else, and neither of them needed to explain it. The ballroom resumed its low hum around them. People began to move again, to talk again, to return to the ordinary business of a reunion. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, in a way that wouldn't fully resolve by the end of the evening, a loosening of something, an adjustment, the way a house settles after a significant thing happens inside it. Later, after Mr. Patterson had been given every word Marcus had kept for him across 20 years, after the grateful handshake and the longer conversation that followed the one that moved through everything the years had held, the scholarship abandoned, the years of night work, the son now grown and doing well, all of it laid out in the unhurried way that only very old trust can carry. Marcus found himself on the hotel's rooftop terrace. The city spread out below in its ordinary majesty, lights stacked against the dark like a second sky, the distant pulse of traffic moving through streets that never fully went to sleep, the cool, dry air of late October, moving between buildings and carrying with it the feeling that the year was folding in on itself, making room for whatever came next. Sophia was already there. She had found her way up ahead of him, and she was standing at the railing with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, looking at the city the way people look at things when they're thinking about something else entirely. She hadn't taken off her coat. The wind at that height had an edge to it, and she stood into it rather than stepping back, which told him something he had already suspected about the particular quality of her patience. Marcus joined her at the railing. They stood in silence for a while, the comfortable silence of people who have shared enough history that the absence of words is not a deficit. The city below them moved and breathed and continued its indifferent business. Finally, Sophia spoke. She said she had been looking for him. Not the professional version. Not in the capacity of board business or investment strategy. Not for any reason that had a business rationale attached to it. She had been looking for Marcus Johnson himself. For the person who had sat across from her in a break room 15 years ago and given her something that no line item in a financial report could ever capture. She had thought about him, she said. Over the years, in the spaces between the demands and the decisions, and the relentless forward motion of building something that mattered, she had thought about that night. About the specific quality of attention he had given her, not charity, not condescension, just one person treating another person's problem as though it were worth solving. Marcus listened. He was looking at the city. She had a way of saying things directly, he had noticed, that most people spent a great deal of energy avoiding. It was one of the things that had made him believe in her company long before the numbers gave him a reason to. He turned to look at her. She was already looking at him. There was something in her expression that had the quality of a decision already made, not impulsive, not performed, but settled in the way that decisions are settled when a person has given them enough time and thought, not if they mattered, she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. There was a version of himself, the version that had spent the better part of 2 decades moving through the world with his head down, attending to what needed attending to, not asking for anything that wasn't offered that would have deflected here, would have said something self-deprecating, something that reduced the moment, something that returned them safely to the territory of professional friendship and shared history, and nothing more complex than that. He recognized the impulse. He set it aside. "I thought about you too," he said. "Over the years." She smiled. Not the polished smile of a CEO, the smaller, quieter one that he suspected fewer people had seen. "You're a very difficult person to find," she said, "when you're not in a break room at 9 o'clock at night, apparently." He laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes without preparation. "That was a long time ago," he said. "You were determined, though. Even then, you could have folded. You didn't." "I had help," she said. "You had everything you needed already," he said. "I just helped you see it." She shook her head. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Minimize it. You do that. You minimize things. Your role in things. I've noticed it in meetings. You say something that changes the entire direction of a discussion, and then you sit back and let everyone else claim the idea." He looked at her. She was right, and he knew she was right. And the fact that she had paid close enough attention to know it told him something specific and important about what kind of attention she had been paying. "Old habit," he said. I know, she said. I'm asking you to consider breaking it. They were both quiet again. The city moved below them, a siren somewhere in the middle distance. The faint sound of music from the ballroom, 13 floors down, reaching them as something barely audible and entirely peripheral. Sophia, he said, what is it you're actually asking me? She looked at him for a long moment. I'm asking, she said, whether you'll let me take you to dinner. Not the board dinner, not the quarterly meeting, just dinner. You and me, somewhere without an agenda. And you order whatever you want. And we talk about whatever matters. And at the end of the night, we figure out what comes next. He looked at the city. He looked back at her. Provided, he said, with the particular gravity of a man delivering a serious condition, that you don't say he's with me to the maitre d'. She laughed. It was full and genuine, and it moved across the rooftop like something that belonged there. Absolutely not, she said. She held out her hand, not the handshake of colleagues, but something more deliberate. An offering. He looked at it, then he took it. They stood at the railing for a while longer, side by side, hands clasped, looking at the ordinary, extraordinary spectacle of the city, doing what cities do, continuing, accumulating, moving toward morning without pausing, to acknowledge the things that happen quietly on rooftops in the dark. He thought about Mr. Patterson's hands gripping his. He thought about his son grown now, doing well, calling on Sundays with the particular cheerful brevity of young people who love their parents but have their own full lives to attend to, their own stories accumulating in their own quiet ways. He thought about the warehouse, the night shifts, the courses taken at hours when the rest of the world was asleep, the years of work that had never once looked the way success is supposed to look from the outside, and how none of that had ever felt like failure from the inside, because he had known what he was building, even when no one else could see it. He thought about Ryan Carter's face in the moment of his apology, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to compassion. Ryan had never been the villain of his story. He had just been a person who saw the surface and mistook it for the whole. Everyone did that sometimes. Everyone was fighting something invisible. Everyone was carrying something the room couldn't see. You know what I've learned? He said. She looked at him. The people who are quickest to tell you what you are, he said, are always the people who spent the least time actually looking. She was quiet for a moment. And the ones who look? They're the ones worth knowing, he said. She squeezed his hand once brief, certain. And they stood together as the night settled around the city, and the lights held steady against the dark, and the reunion 13 floors below them slowly wound toward its end. There is a version of success that is loud. It announces itself in car models and watch brands and the careful architecture of an entrance. It requires an audience. It needs to be witnessed to feel real. And then there is the other kind, quieter, denser, built in the dark over years of decisions no one was watching, composed of sacrifices that were never catalogued and kindnesses that were never expected back. Marcus Johnson had always known which kind he was building. He had never needed the room to understand it. But on this particular autumn evening, at the top of a hotel in the city, where he had grown up poor and dismissed, and certain of nothing except the responsibility he had chosen to carry, he allowed himself, for just a moment, to let someone see it. Not the portfolio, not the board seat, not the exit multiple, or the investment thesis, or any of the things that could be expressed as a number. Just him, the person who had sat in the break room at 9 o'clock, the person who had believed that a frightened 23-year-old deserved 2 hours of real attention. The person who had gotten up every morning for 2 decades and done the work that needed doing without asking anyone to witness it. Sophia turned to him. From now on, she said quietly. We walked together. He nodded. Not a performance, not a conclusion, a beginning. They left the rooftops side by side, and the city below them went on doing what it always did, holding everything up, holding everything in, indifferent to the particular miracle of 2 people deciding, after all this time, to stop going it alone.